Happy opening day of the 2024 rifle season here in the state of Georgia. I'm Mike Berlin and you're watching Wild Fed Family. And today I'm in between morning and afternoon hunts and I was working on something. I was sanitizing my walk-in cooler in anticipation for bringing home a deer this afternoon. Now, over the last 2 to 3 years that I've been posting stuff on social media and YouTube, I have gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of questions about my walk-in cooler setup. So today I'm going to do my very best to answer all of your questions. So this is that video. Let me show you what I'm working with. So I am here in my absolutely filthy garage with my walk-in cooler right behind me. So as you can see, it is simply a 5x5 room that is framed in the corner and hung with sheetrock on the exterior to match all of the walls in the garage. Now, as far as the wall assembly, it's really pretty simple. Now, I have 1/2 inch of sheetrock. I have 3.5 inches of my stud with R13 bat insulation in between it. I have a 1/4 inch piece of particle board, and then I put 2 layers of 3/4 inch styrofoam rigid insulation that is foil faced. So if you do the math, this wall is roughly 5 3/4 inches thick, packed with insulation all the way through. For the door, this is simply an exterior pre-hung door. So that is insulated as well, and just generic hardware, trimmed out. That's it, exterior door. But as you can see, I have the door, I have another layer of 3/4 inch rigid insulation, and on the inside I put a panel of FRP. And that is the same thing that I lined the whole interior with, this FRP. Now, if you're wondering what FRP is, go into generally any commercial kitchen and you're gonna see it on the walls. It stands for fiber reinforced panel, and it's basically just a plastic panel with fiberglass particles in it. So, just a tip, if you're gonna cut this stuff, do it with a pair of snips, not a circular saw, because my arms itched for approximately 18 days when I got done hanging these panels. So that's the wall construction, and that is the general setup. But you're probably wondering how it gets cold. Well, I'm about to show you. So this right here is a window unit, and I have the whole paneling on the front side stripped off so that it's just easier for me to clean and maintain. So rather than having just this cheap old junk filter in here that's not really doing anything, I just have it off. I keep my air compressor right here in the garage on a hose reel, and I'll just blast it clean after each running cycle. But it is not just any old window unit, it is controlled by this CoolBot controller. Now, this thing is pretty cool. So let me show you how this works. So there's a sensor right here. That is a temperature sensor from the window unit itself, and it measures the temperature in here. Well, what the CoolBot does is it takes that, and from this heater wire, I connected the 2 of them with this piece of aluminum foil. And while this thing is running, this red probe touches the thermometer probe, and it tells it it is not cold enough in here. So it heats it up and fools it right here in this foil packet. Now that causes this cooler to keep on running, and what I have here is just a temperature probe that comes up and it measures the temperature in between, these tubes of Freon filled copper. And then this is the temperature probe to the CoolBot unit itself. So the window unit is blowing 34-degree air all the time, and that is every window unit that you have in your house or you have ever seen. The difference is this controller tells it when to stop blowing cold air and when to start blowing cold air. So I'm tricking it, and it is telling it to keep on blowing 34-degree air, so that is why I can get this room down to 34 degrees with just this window unit. But not all window units are created equal. Now, if you go on to the CoolBot website, they will give you a BTU rating for that window unit and the size of the room. So what you're measuring is cubic feet. So if you have a room that is 12 by 12 with a 10-foot ceiling, it's gonna take a larger unit than my 5x5 with a 10-foot ceiling. So being that my cooler is small and I can, I typically only hang 1 or 2 deer in there, I can get away with a slightly smaller unit. But like I said, there's a whole chart on the CoolBot website. So if you're thinking about putting one of these in your garage or in your barn, then just go on there and size up your unit based on your room size. Another thing that I want to say about this window unit is make sure that you have it on a dedicated circuit. So I have a quad receptacle that I put in here, and it is a dedicated circuit to a 20 amp breaker onto my electrical panel. So the only power that is drawn off that breaker is in this cooler. So I cannot be, running a table saw in my garage, trip this cooler, not realize it, and then have a rotting deer in here. It is always going to run. Nothing else that I do in my entire house or garage is going to trip this. If it's running and it's running everything at the same time, I know that I am safe and it's gonna keep on doing its thing. Now, all of this FRP came from one of my job sites. There's a couple scrap pieces left over, so I took it home and hung it in here. Now, you can see that I siliconed these corners. Typically, there's a trim piece that goes in right here, but we ran out of those trim pieces. So I just went to Lowe's and I got a tube of white silicone, and I sealed up all the cracks so that this unit doesn't have to keep pushing air out of cracks. Every bit of air that ends up in here stays in here, and it helps cool this thing more efficiently. The next question that I get asked a lot is what my hanging setup in here is and how I hang my deer. So this right here is a remote to a winch. So there you go. It's just a simple hook. I tend to just slap a gambrel on it and winch my deer up. But look, I can back a golf cart right up to this door, unhook it, and hang them out here without that deer ever touching the ground. And the winch itself is a 440 pound and 880 pound rated winch from Harbor Freight. Now, that is, I want to say, a $115 winch that I got a couple years ago. And what I ended up doing was just putting a piece of strut, and I have 3 structural framing screws that go into my ceiling joist, and then that winch just clamps onto that strut. But just being like this, it can pick up 440 pounds. I don't think there's ever been a deer that was killed that was over 440 pounds, so you're good. But if you want to hang 2 250 pound deer in here, you can add just a pulley to this, and it just winches up back to itself, and it'll pick up 880 pounds for you just fine. The next question that I get asked a lot is, well, because it's in your garage, where does the condensate that the air conditioning unit produces go to? Well, this one for me could use some improvements, but I'm gonna show you how I got it set up. So here's the window unit just hanging out of the back side of the cooler, and what I did was I drilled like a 3/16 1/4 inch hole in the bottom of this condensate drip pan, and I took it down just 1/4 inch vinyl tubing, and it drips down into this 3-gallon bucket. Now, could I use that bucket as somewhat of a sump pit, put a pump on it and pump it outside so I'd never have to worry about it? Yes, of course I could. But the thing is, it really depends on what the temperature is doing outside and how often that I actually have to empty that thing. So during November through January, I can go roughly 2 weeks because the outside air temperature is much cooler and it doesn't produce as much condensation between emptying that 3-gallon bucket. Now, if it is early bow season and it's consistently between 80 and 90 degrees outside, about every 3 days I have to empty that bucket. So at its worst, you're looking at 1 gallon of condensate per day. I can deal with that just fine. Now, another question that I get asked a lot is, why build a walk-in cooler when you could just skin and quarter that deer and put it on ice? Well, being that I'm in Georgia, I've noticed that there is a cultural difference in the way that deer are handled from field to table compared to where I grew up in upstate New York, Syracuse, New York specifically. Now, when we killed deer while I was growing up, what we'd end up doing is just gutting them out, getting the innards out, and splitting the carcass open. Hide on, they hung in our detached garage for 5 to 7 days. When that time frame was up, we would go ahead, skin them out, quarter them up, bring them inside, cut them up, and wrap them in butcher paper, stick them in the freezer. But when I moved to Georgia and started killing deer, especially during bow season, I realized that it wasn't such an easy thing to go ahead and get the innards out of a deer and hang it in a tree, expecting it to stay cold, because it would rot in about 24 hours. So I asked some guys that live down here, what do they do? And their suggestion was to skin it, quarter it up, put it on ice, and leave the drain plug unplugged, and just go ahead and restock with ice for, you know, a couple days while that rigor gets out of it. But there's a problem with that method. When you have it in a cold, moist condition, what you're doing is creating bacterial growth. And to be honest with you, I'm not really a big fan of that. So the question that I had for myself is, well, what is the beef industry doing? And well, here's the thing, every piece of beef that you're eating is roughly a month old. Now, when that cow was slaughtered, it gets skinned and that carcass is cut in half and it hangs in a cooler for usually a minimum of 21 days before that meat is actually cut up into the cuts that you see at the grocery store. So if you can hang beef for 21 days, well, why wouldn't I be able to hang venison for 5, 10, 15, 21 days as well? Wouldn't it taste better? Isn't there a reason that they're doing that to the beef that you're eating? The answer is yes, there is a reason why they're doing that. And the reason is because when you hang that beef for that 21 days, one, it's reducing moisture. Now, it isn't drying that meat out. And also on beef, you have a fat cap that protects that. What it is doing is it's slowly losing moisture so that you don't have a wet, soppy piece of bacteria-filled meat. On top of that, there is a natural enzymatic breakdown of that meat. So it's also building flavor, reducing moisture, and becoming more tender. But on beef, there is a fairly hardy fat cap that protects it, whereas venison, you don't get that. So when I do hang my deer, yes, I leave it with the hide on. Could I skin it? Absolutely, but what I end up with is a pellicle on that entire deer, and that pellicle needs to be trimmed away. Now, this is complete preference, but I prefer to pull a cold hide off rather than trimming a pellicle on every single exterior surface of that deer with a knife. It is simply time consuming. I don't enjoy doing it, and I can get a hide off in about 2 minutes. But the bottom line is this: I built a walk-in cooler so that it is convenient for me to bring a deer home, clean it out, leave the hide on, hang it up, and I have roughly 14 days to deal with that deer. I can deal with it in sections, or I can spend a couple hours and do it all at once. Not only that, it is providing me with a higher quality venison that is aged and protected with the hide on during that aging process. And to me, I think it tastes better. It is more of a controlled environment, and to be honest with you, if I'm gonna spend all this time and effort going out in the woods doing what I do, I want to take care of the food that I bring home and make sure I am getting the very best result possible and not cutting corners in any sort of way. But I hope I answered all of your whats and whys and hows. But if I didn't, make sure that you leave any sort of questions in the comments, and I will do my very best to get back to you and explain in detail a answer to your question. So that's all I got for this video. I hope you get inspired in some sort of way. And if there's a way that I can improve, go ahead, leave that in the comments too, because I'm always trying to make things a little bit better. But I want to say thank you for watching and subscribing, and I will see you on the next video.